Welcome to the latest edition of the Jay-Z Show. We're trying a few things differently this time by, I don't know, at popular request, I've ditched my absurdly large headphones and I'm trying a new setup. I'm also in the new Counterpoint studio, so hopefully the sound quality will be a bit better than last week. I'm Zafar Sobhan from Dhaka, Bangladesh. I'm joined, as always, by Jon Danilowicz. Jon, tell us a little bit about where you are and what are we seeing in your background?
Right. So I'm back in Massachusetts, but the background is King Street in Alexandria, Virginia. And if I move my head a little to the side, you'll see behind me
Yes,
the
okay.
George Washington Masonic Temple Memorial in Alexandria, Virginia.
Okay, excellent, excellent. We shall come back to that later in the show, if time permits. But let's start, of course, the big news in Bangladesh is the really horrific assassination attempt. I mean, there's no other thing to call it, of Osman Hadi, who was a student leader, really came to prominence during the July uprising, where he was one of the lead organizers, and since then had founded and led his own political formation, Inkilab Moncho. He was running as an independent candidate for MP in the Dhaka 8 constituency. And as I'm sure all of our viewers know, we've seen this horrific footage, really, of these two people driving up when he was on an electric rickshaw and shooting him at point blank range. So this is this is a very worrisome development. Elections just 2 months away. At latest, I have heard he is still in critical condition in intensive care. I think the bullet has been removed from his head, but we still really, as far as I'm aware, it's still touch and go. And I mean, it does seem like a very, very serious matter.
Now, had you ever met him? Have you met Osman Hadi?
I can't recall. I can't recall that I have, but I may have in a group of other student leaders.
Yeah. No, I
Have
don't
you?
think I've ever. No, I haven't met him. But he is a very memorable character. I would see his videos, I'd see his
Yeah.
posts. Seemingly a very charismatic young leader and fearless. And it's prophetic, I think, in a way. Some of his statements, foreshadowing or foreseeing the possibility that he would be a target of political violence. And again, even the photographs of him with the outstretched arms, which bring to mind Abu Sayyid. Again, it's an eerie echo of what we saw back in July of 2024.
No, absolutely. I mean, of course, Bangladesh has a very bloody political history going all the way back to the Liberation War. And what we had hoped, of course, was that the sacrifices which were made during the July uprising, one of the benefits of those would be that we would move towards a political future which wouldn't be marred by bloodshed and violence. And in fact, in the last 15 months, I think political violence has been fairly well contained. But now with elections around the corner, this is really something I think we now have to be a little bit concerned about.
No, absolutely. I woke up this morning and was checking my my messages, and this was the first thing, obviously, that I saw this morning, dominating social media, WhatsApp groups, etc. And it was, I think, almost a perfect storm for somebody who's inclined to conspiracy theories, because you had
Right.
several immediate suspects, including his political rivals, obviously the former ruling party and its supporters. Again, I think there was some information developing through the day that some suspects may have been identified, but I always treat these initial reports with some skepticism. I assume and I hope that the police investigation is underway and there'll be some clarity. But certainly, it's a delicate moment for Bangladesh. I'm not sure what it feels like on the ground, but I've made the comparison several times today, reminding myself of when I was in Southern Africa in the early
Right.
1990s, at a delicate moment in South Africa's transition, and Chris Hani, who was a firebrand young leftist leader, was brutally assassinated by some elements from the previous apartheid regime. And people at the time were worried that the whole transition in South Africa would be disrupted. Fortunately, under Nelson Mandela's leadership, the South African parties were able to come together. And I think this assassination spurred them on to reaching an agreement. But it was touch and go for a while. And I have that sense from far away that Bangladesh is in a very similar moment right now.
I mean, it's absolutely correct. And one of the things which we had been hopeful for, and I've spoken to people in the interim government, and they understand very well that, elections are absolutely going to be the key indicator at the end of the day of their performance. They've just announced the election schedule. They are going to be on February 12th. And, we've really entered the home stretch as far as this government is concerned, and everything is geared towards election, and everything is hinging on us having good elections. So then, of course, there are going to be powers out there which want to see that we don't have a good election. And so is their ability to foment violence? What is their ability to foment disturbance? And up until this shooting, it had seemed that the government was fairly in control. And I spoke to the government. They'd shown a great deal of confidence that there would not be violence, that they would really be able to keep things under control. So this now, of course, is a new reality we wake up to. The one hope, of course, is that this now will galvanize. Again, it will not just the government and the law enforcement agencies and the army and whoever else has a responsibility to help us secure the nation, but also the Bangladeshi people. I think, in a sense, maybe this will make us realize how much is at stake. And I think ultimately, if everyone stands up, then this kind of violence will not stand, but it remains to be seen.
Right. The other thing I was thinking about today, obviously, for much of my professional career since 2001, there was a great focus on terrorism. And I spent a number of years at the U.S. Naval War College, both as a student and as a professor, looking at issues related to terrorism. And one of my colleagues there had a lecture that he used to give about the audiences of terrorism, because you would see a terrorist act and you think, how does this serve the purpose of the terrorist, particularly these brutal acts? If you think that the terrorists, so again, whoever it was that was behind this killing, you would think that they would want to gain support from some element of the population. And you wonder, how do they think they're going to do this through violence? But what you realize is that there's multiple audiences. So one audience, obviously, are the supporters of that group, the in-group, trying to encourage them, trying to rally more people to their side. There's an international audience. So obviously, whoever was behind this wants to send a message to the world that Bangladesh is in chaos, or that the interim government is incapable of providing security. I'm sure they want to send a message to other politicians, including Tarique Rahman. And there's been a lot of speculation about his concerns about his own security, or others' concern for his security. And then there's the Bangladeshi people at large. So, the terrorists are going to do what they're going to do. Law enforcement will try to stop them. But I think what's critically important is how the people respond, whether it be the common people, the government, the other political parties. So if you know what the terrorists are trying to do, then the best way to counter them is to not play into their hands. Easier said than done, perhaps, but that's my sense.
No, I mean, it seems fairly clear. I mean, again, we've been having these discussions here in Bangladesh on the ground. What is the goal here? I mean, I think the goal is fairly simple. It is to create, an impression that Bangladesh is right now ungovernable, and that Bangladesh is a dangerous place. And, perhaps with a eye to delaying the elections, or certainly with an eye to making sure that if elections go through, that people stay home and they do not vote, or that the elections are otherwise considered compromised. So, clearly, the idea is to foment this kind of chaos and unrest, it seems to me. I mean, that would be my interpretation of this. And I think you're right. I mean, the way we stand up against this is a nation. I mean, I think at the end of the day, one of the things we should all unite upon is that, what will a new Bangladesh look like in 2026 and beyond? What is the promise of the July uprising? What is fundamentally, what are we talking about when we talk about the July Charter and we talk about Bangladesh 2.0? We talk about a new Bangladesh. We're talking about a Bangladesh where these things don't happen. Okay, it doesn't really matter so much as to which political party is in power. It doesn't really matter which ideology we pursue. Whether we're right wing, whether we're left wing, whether we're this, whether we're that. I think what all Bangladeshis would like to see is we'd like to see this kind of violence removed
Mhm.
from our streets. We want a Bangladesh where, people are not disappeared, where there are no extrajudicial assassinations, where people aren't kept in secret prisons, and where people are not gunned down in the streets, when they're in especially politicians, who are trying to stand for public office.
Right. And I think the other thing that's happened is that, elections in Bangladesh have become so high stakes. I mean, on the one hand, we haven't had competitive elections in the last 15 years. So people have gotten out of practice with that. But, assuming that, the competitiveness of the elections returns, you're going to have winners and losers, and that's obvious. So on the one hand, the parties and the candidates are competing against each other, but they're competing within, I guess, a playing field in which there need to be some common rules and some common understandings, because there are others outside the system who are trying to play that role of spoilers. And again, I think what makes this particularly salient with the attack today was that this is a district or a constituency that's particularly interesting in terms of just the personalities. Again, a
Yeah.
BNP stalwart, the student, leader from the Jamaat, with Osman Hadi, and you can see other constituencies where you're going to have a similar lineup of, heavy
Yeah.
hitters, and there'll be this risk and this tension because by definition only one can win.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But again, I was at an event last month where both Arman, as
Hmm.
well as this is what's his full name?
Tuli,
Um, yeah,
Barrister
no, well,
Ahmed bin
Tuli was
Qasim.
there. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. We're both there, and what was wonderful actually to see was them sharing a stage, speaking very fondly and well of one another. And only one of them can be elected. They're both rival candidates for their constituency in Dhaka. And this is the kind of, on the one hand, I was like, well, I would like to see both of them in the parliament because I find both of them very impressive people. On the other hand, this was also the kind of uh, atmosphere in which, we had once upon a time in Bangladesh, and
Hmm.
even before. I mean, if you can believe this, in pre-liberation Pakistan, where political rivals would deal with one another on a very civil basis. And that's something we've lost. And I think that's something which is very important to regain. So let's see, hopefully Osman Hadi will pull through. He's fighting. He's a strong man, and by the grace of God, he will pull through. And hopefully, we as a nation are going to, you know, use this to stiffen our spine and understand what's really at stake. It's interesting that this came just in the wake of the announcement of the election schedule, because that has been something which has been a subject of a great deal of speculation. They've said that it was going to be in February, but then you have a lot of naysayers saying, oh well, it's not going to happen. Now I think the election train is well and truly rolling. And February 12th has been set, and I hope very much that and I think the whole country hopes. If you look at the opinion polls, people want this election, and people want this election sooner rather than later, and they're looking forward to it. This is a very important moment in Bangladesh's history.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's funny because in the wake of the announcement of, February 12th as the election, everyone was going back and looking through their old social media posts and their old writing and, trying to say that they got it right. And I was struck by how many people correctly guessed February 12th. So in some ways, I think it was probably the worst kept secret in Bangladesh that was going to be the election day. And I think, frankly, back to Chief Advisor Yunus's meeting with Tarique Rahman in London. I mean, even at that time, there were whispers that that was the date that they had settled on. But be that as it may,
Yes.
it's great that it's now out in the open. The whole schedule has been declared. The parties can now start going into election mode, and there's all of the steps along the way that the Election Commission has put out there. There's a lot of questions about elections. Both in terms of the campaigns and what's eventually going to happen. And I think, again, for me, it's shaping up to be, at least on the face of it, a much more competitive election than maybe many had thought a few months back, or certainly back in August of 2024. So that changes the calculus as well, that perhaps it's going to be a competitive election, and that, again, the candidates will matter, the campaigns will matter. The risk, I think, is that, for politicians, there's always, on the one hand, putting forward your message, but then negative campaigning steps in. And certainly in the social media realm, we've seen a lot of fighting online, at least, between supporters, particularly of the BNP and Jamaat.
Well, it'll be interesting to see. This is really the first election they're facing off against one another. And, in the last, they have been allied either very directly or indirectly in the past. So it's going to be interesting to see. Of course, the other big news is December 25. It's the prior to the shooting of Osman Hadi, the one subject everyone had been talking about was Tarique Rahman and, of course, Khalida Zia, who is also critically ill in hospital, in whether he was coming back, why he wasn't coming back. And it was a subject of feverish speculation. I think this is, we have this show every 2 weeks. So I think all of this transpired after our last conversation. So it's not something we've really talked about. But, and I don't know the whys and the wherefores of this, but I think it's a very good thing that Tarique is now committed to coming back on the 25th. I feel December 16th would have been symbolically better than Christmas Day, and I'm wondering whether I dare, put out cartoons of him in like a red suit with a bag of gifts, flying in on a sleigh and a reindeer. I don't know how his fans would take that. I think it would be funny nevertheless. But I think this is a great thing.
Yeah, well, from my time in Pakistan, I'm also reminded that December 25th is Quaid-e-Azam's birthday as well. So Pakistan was always able to celebrate Christmas Day, not by calling it Christmas, but by celebrating Quaid-e-Azam's birthday. I have to ask you, though, with regard to Tarique's return, did you take much heat for your editorial in Counterpoint, which was, I think, pretty direct in terms of, calling him out and, calling for him to meet the moment? Did you get any pushback that you can talk about?
To the contrary. No, to the contrary. I mean, I actually wrote it quite carefully because I think a lot of the social media chatter, which I have been listening to or have been exposed to, was much more critical and really excoriating. And I actually thought it was important to step back and point out that, look, this is a personal moment. And, one doesn't want to be too harsh in one's criticism of how someone deals with a very difficult time in their personal life. So I kind of led with that. But as you said, I was very firm that if he wishes to be a political leader, that, political leaders, of course, have a personal life, but they are accountable and beholden to the public as well. And I think I made the point, but I think it was made respectfully. And the feedback I got from his party was very positive. I thought they accepted the points which were made, and they thought that it was written in a respectful and in restrained manner, which they appreciated. And I think a lot of them also feel that that the underlying message was one which they had been trying to send to him as well. And who knows, maybe that had some kind of an impact.
Yeah, there you go. And I assume now with his return imminent, the talk about Begum Zia going off for medical treatment will probably die down or go away. I can't foresee a situation where he's on his way back to Dhaka and she's getting on an airplane to go to London or elsewhere for medical treatment.
No, I imagine my suspicion would be that one of the reasons is that, they were trying to get her on the plane, but it's possible that she's too sick to really move. I mean, that would be my working assumption. And so that now being the case, then really there was no alternative but for him to come here, which is fair enough.
Yeah. Well, when I was in Dhaka in March of this year, Tarique's return and his role in the party was topmost in everyone's mind then. So it became clear to me at that point that it was better for him to return sooner rather than later. He chose later. That's fine. We can agree to disagree. But what I hope, though, now that he's coming back, is that he's not coming back only to run or to lead the campaign. I mean, obviously, as the putative prime minister, acting chairman of the party, he has a role to play, an important role in the campaign. But if he is also preparing himself to potentially govern, he has to do things, in my mind, that are different than just campaigning. And that's getting to know the country that he's been away from for 17 years and letting the people of Bangladesh get to know him, not just the common people, the voters who will, by
Mm-hmm.
definition, it'll be limited in terms of how many of them will have direct contact, particularly given security situation. But he needs to get to know people who he will have to work with if he becomes prime minister, whether it be members of the bureaucracy, the security forces, the other political parties, some of whom may be in opposition if he's in government or vice versa, and the international community. Again, even though he didn't return to Bangladesh or he won't return to Bangladesh until December, the other thing that didn't happen between March or between last August and his return is he hasn't traveled anywhere else either. I know that there's been a steady stream of people going to see him in London, including international actors, but he's largely unknown in the international community as well. So he's going to be busy for these next couple of months leading up to the elections, and then, what follows.
Now, it's going to be very interesting to see what his itinerary is for the next two elections. I mean, I do think that the two things are not mutually exclusive in the sense that by campaigning, you do get to see, a lot of the people, you do get to see a lot of the country. But of course, there's only so many hours in the day. And, of course, you can't see everyone. And so it's how that experience is curated is very important. And, he, like I said, it's now less than 2 months before the election. So it's really very little time as far as that goes. It's going to be interesting, of course, as you say, that, and I think this is another element of the recent shooting, is, I think one of the concerns which Tarique had and the party has surrounding him is a security one. And so that will, of course, have been re-emphasized on yesterday's event. So I wonder what that's going to do. So he's still coming, but I fear that one of the things which maybe is he's surrounded by too tight of a security cordon. And I understand why security would be utmost of anyone's concern, really. That may hamper his ability to reach out and really sort of connect with people. And I think, that is a fundamental problem right now, sort of where we are in Bangladesh, and hopefully in time we'll move beyond that, because that's the one thing people should be able to do. I mean, they should be able to travel and move around and get to meet people without fear for their safety, but it hasn't been that way for some time.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting, actually. They're setting up an interesting potential comparison or contrast with other political leaders. So I have no doubt that there are threats against Tarique Rahman. Obviously, there would be, both because of his potential future role and because of his past. But by the same token, other candidates, including, and I think particularly the NCP leadership, or some of the independents who are former student leaders, they have a target on them as well. I mean, if you look at Wahid, if you look at Mahfouz, if you look at Asif, Sargis, Hasnat, all of them. And my guess is that if you look at the relative resources that will be allocated to security, Tarique will have a lot more security than any of them. So you'll have this image potentially, and an image I don't think you'd want if you were the BNP, of Tarique Rahman in this overwhelming security bubble, whereas these 20-something or 30-something-year-olds are kind of going around doing their thing, having already demonstrated their personal courage and bravery on multiple occasions, including and since last July and August. So I think he has to be careful on the optics on that.
Yeah, no question. But it's going to be very interesting to see what this then now does to the election process, and what this does to the national mood, because this is something we've been waiting for a long time. No one can really accurately predict. The BNP election strategy, such as it is, really does center on him coming around. He's got 60 days or slightly less than 60 days now. If he comes on the 25th, it's barely a month and a half when you think about it. So he can't really hit that many places, but they'll presumably have him barnstorming around the country, and it'll be a very emotive, and I presume that's going to work very well in terms of their messaging. But one has to wait and see how well that works. It's a new time for us, and we really don't know We really don't know. What the main concern, and then this is separate from Tarique, is to actually see whether the law and order situation can be brought fully under control. Because I think that is important for having a good election and making sure that people feel that's a good election, people feel safe to vote. Because I think that is, like I said, it's really the final piece of the puzzle for the interim government. They've been in power about a year and a half, but the key now to everything is making sure this election goes smoothly, that it seemed to go smoothly.
Right. Yeah. I mean, several groups I am part of had discussions on these issues today. And obviously, there are formal rules and laws that the Election Commission and the law enforcement agencies will be responsible for enforcing related to election codes of conduct. But in my mind, it's as important what the parties and the candidates accept voluntarily or agree to voluntarily as much as what's imposed on them. So, for example, I would like to see in an ideal world, an image of, the political leadership of the different parties coming together and saying, hey, we need to set some ground rules of what our supporters will and won't do, both in the real world and online. And this may play against, conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom in politics is you're always on the attack, right? You never let a opportunity go to waste. You look for your opponent's weakness and you strike. This isn't a normal time. And I think the more that the parties themselves show some maturity and leadership and keep the election positive and focused on that rather than, bringing everyone down, I think that's what the moment calls for. But it's going to be tough for people to resist that. Again, because politics is such a high stakes game in Bangladesh, and all the contestants have been out of power. And all of them are, I'm sure, looking to the potential benefits of being in power. So it's going to be difficult, I think, to restrain people.
Yeah, I mean, what I'd like to see, of course, is, pre-election debates. I mean, I think joint campaigning perhaps would be, that would be a step too far. I've never seen any such thing like that in Bangladesh. But, candidate debates. And of course, as you point out, the problem in Bangladesh is that, the stakes are so high. But of course, that is, in a way, sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So if you are to go and change the rules of the game now, so let's say if I were a candidate, okay, and I think, well, I can play this two ways. I can say, okay, I'm going to put all of my heart and soul into winning this election, let the chips fall where they may, and everything is about winning, and then I will have everything. Or I can say, well, look, there's a chance I'm going to lose the election. So in that sense, better to come up with a system where there is comity between me and my rival, such that after the election, whoever wins doesn't have all the power, whoever loses isn't a hunted man or woman.
Right.
And work on that. So maybe, there's going to be that kind of calculation going, that, let's try and do things a little differently, and let's try and make it a less high stakes affair and more, important. But then beyond that, we'll have a kind of a new political calculus in Bangladesh than we've had in the past. It's always been winner take all. Let's change that.
No, absolutely. And I think this is, again, back to Tarique Rahman and why it's so critically important that he be on the ground. He's issued lots of statements. And I read, for example, recently a statement that he issued about corruption, which frankly read as if something, that could have been written, in the U.S. Embassy when I was working there.
Right.
I don't know who wrote.
You're doing him no favors by saying that.
Well, again, he said all of the right things. There was nothing, if he had asked me to edit it, there's nothing I would have changed. But what I don't know is how much of this came from him and how much of it came from the team that he has around him. So I can foresee a situation where, he is sitting face to face with some of his, party leaders. Somebody brings up this statement and says, hey, boss, do you really mean this? Are you really expecting that this is what we're going to do after the election? Or, can we do things the way we've always done things and the way we would like to do things? And I think that's the kind of conversation you have to have, face to face with somebody.
Right. No, and we'll only really find this out once he's here. What are we getting? We don't. We simply don't know. I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see. We all remember. I mean, for most people, the young people especially, he's a bit of a blank slate. He's been out of the country for some 17 years, and so the younger voters probably have no direct memory of him whatsoever. Older voters, such as myself, we do have a recollection of Tarique from 2001 to 2006, which was a very different situation. So it's going to be very interesting to see who he is now. Things change, people change. It's 15 years. Who is Tarique Rahman in 2025? Who is Tarique Rahman in 2026? What will the BNP look like moving forward? And indeed, that same question needs to be and can be asked about the Jamaat-e-Islam, and indeed about the new political parties who are still, I think, struggling to define themselves. We know what they stood for in July, and in the role they played. But moving forward, what is their vision? I think that is still to be decided. I think we're running out of time. Jon, any final words?
No, it's been great to reconnect again. A lot is happening. Look forward to future discussions, and hopefully going live and getting our message out there as events are breaking will resonate with our viewers. And in the future, maybe we can find ways to interact as well through questions and other mechanisms.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Jon. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope these conversations we're having are finding resonance, and our audience will continue to grow. Thank you very much. Catch you again in 2 weeks.
All right. Thanks, Zafar.